what gives you hope that what you are doing as a pastor is worthwhile? And actually give me something that you see or know or observe that gives you hope today.
It's an interesting question, because I've thought about it, and the same kind of things that inspired me at Tui Ridge still inspire me today, even in ministry. The things I loved about the ministry at Tui Ridge was watching young people grow in their faith. And we saw that through our teen camps and junior camps, and big camps later on. Even seeing my own staff develop a faith, that was pretty cool to see. It's the same thing in pastoral ministry, so maybe God had a hand over it all the way. But watching young people fall in love with Jesus is just incredible.
Andrew, welcome to Dealing Hope. I am so glad that you can join me today. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Pastor Eddie. I'm feeling good, and thanks for asking me to be here.
You're very welcome, and I'm looking forward to capturing your story, as well as just seeing if I can tap into Andrew West's thinking, because I've seen the Lord use you in many different ways, and I'm sure some of the things that you have seen and you've recognized in your journey will be a real benefit to others. But let me go back in history.
Okay.
So just a very simple question, but I think it's a really great connecting question. What food takes you back to your childhood, and where was that?
Oh, wow. So I grew up in Taranaki in the North Island of New Zealand, on a farm. So we were a farming family, always Seventh-day Adventists, but we weren't vegetarian. So for me, the roast meal is what takes me back. Even though I don't eat mutton or anything like that now, I'd have to say the roast potatoes that Mum used to do, they were the best roast potatoes ever. And there was nothing quite like a nicely cooked piece of mutton with some mint sauce and roast potatoes. So yeah, don't judge me, but that takes me back to my childhood. If we go into a restaurant and I smell the roast potatoes and that, and the mutton, and that, it just takes me right back to those days on the farm. We only ever ate clean meat, but that was us. Yeah, so roast potato.
Sure. I can smell that right now.
Yeah.
Oh.
They're the best.
Look, there are people who are joining in who may not know where the Taranaki is. Just a bit of a geography lesson, please, Andrew.
Okay, well, that's a bit tricky. So if you're looking at the North Island of New Zealand, and you head down south from where Auckland is, you've got the little bump on the left-hand side where the mountain is, Mount Taranaki or Mount Egmont, and we were just there on that area there, way out in the sticks in the bush. So pretty amazing place to grow up, really.
Yeah. I can imagine just the surroundings, the nature, and all that you were raised with being foreign to where you are now in a very busy Tauranga and Bay of Plenty region of New Zealand.
Yeah, if you were to tell us or have told me as a young person all those years ago that this is where I would be now, I would have laughed at you. It's just not what I would have ever imagined doing. Yeah.
And I look forward to getting into your story, because I connect you with your story when you have told us of you coming to Tui Ridge on your way somewhere else and all that happened and you ending up at Tui Ridge Park. But we'll fill that in a moment. I want to back in a little bit to you as somebody who I know as an outdoors enthusiast. You love your mountain bike riding and other things like that. In fact, I think you've had a few spills and accidents as well.
We won't talk about those.
Okay, we won't ask that question. But tell us about your hobbies, outside of you're a pastor and that's where most people either know you as a pastor or as the manager of Tui Ridge Park in Rotorua. But outside of those roles, what are your hobbies, interests, things that you enjoy doing?
Okay, well, growing up on the farm made me have a real love for the land and love for the bush. So anything to do with, let's cut that one out. We enjoy.
I had
Um,
I had that happen to me on Sabbath. I was preaching, and Siri started answering me.
yeah, I'll make Google go away. um, yeah, so for me, I've always loved being out in the bush, more than I do like the beach. I'm not a big fan of beaches, which God
No.
has a sense of humor sending me to Tauranga. Um, but I love mountain biking. We got into mountain biking not long after we moved up to Rotorua, and just really fell in love with it. So
Mm.
that's our biggest pastime. Both my wife and I and our family get into mountain biking quite regularly. Um, but love hiking out in the bush as well. Getting out into some New Zealand native bush is just spectacular. Um, I'm a practical person, so I like building and making things. So
Yes.
projects around the house. My wife likes to get me doing things around the house. But I also like making kit set models. So I'm a bit of a fan of making the plastic models and building them. It's mainly focusing around World War II history. So that's one of my sideline things that
Mm.
it's just nice to get away and do something different.
I didn't know that about the models, and
Yeah.
it's really great to hear. I'll tell you what I do remember is another funny kind of memory. And I won't ask you about your memories of me, but I remember coming to your home there when you were the manager of Tui Ridge with my sons, and you were all on a Saturday afternoon watching, those vegetables.
Veggie Tales. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we used to have premieres every time we got a new DVD. So I think you were in on that.
I
Um,
think so.
yeah, we love our daughter really loved Veggie Tales.
Okay.
And then when we had our son, he got into he inherited that like as well, and we got hooked. So we just the newest ones that come out, and we'd watch them and have a bit of a laugh. I love the adult humor that was in them. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
but yeah, very
He's,
unusual. Yeah,
yeah. He's an interesting character of Phil Fisher, and very clever.
very clever. Yeah, very
Yeah.
very clever. Mm.
I actually didn't follow VeggieTales very closely, but in the last, probably since COVID lockdowns began listening to the Holy Post podcast, which he and Sky Jatani and a couple of guests host, and great sense of humor, but
Mm.
also very insightful when it comes to the church and what's happening in the church today. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very creative in their thinking, and yeah, we always appreciated that.
And,
Something
and
we've got into recently with our lockdown has been watching the web series The Chosen,
okay, okay.
which I highly recommend. Yeah,
So tell
very
us a little
effective.
about that. I've heard about it. I haven't watched it. What's that about?
So it's basically the story of Jesus in a TV format, which is you see the big blockbuster movies, but this is more. They want to do it multiple seasons of the show. So you've got episodes. They've done 2 seasons so far, and there's 8 episodes in each one. But I just love the way they fill in the gaps in scripture. They
Mm,
do a bit more character development of the disciples and the impact that Jesus had on their lives. So quite fresh, quite
mm,
unique, some of the approaches, but I've really appreciated it. And I love detail. So I love the fact that they add in really
mm,
quite strong details around how they celebrated Sabbath in those days and
mm,
just the way that life went on. So it's just really, really good program. And I love the fact too that they don't take away from scripture; they add just a bit more flesh to some of the
mm,
stories
mm,
that are there.
mm.
So, and if anything, took me back to the scriptures to read the stories again. So very cool.
I will check that out because I've heard of The Chosen, and again, like you, speaking very highly about it. And I'm stuck at the moment because I went through from Exodus to First Samuel yesterday looking for a story. I needed a story for my sermon this Sabbath, and I just couldn't. And it's a story that'll jump out that has some real opportunity to make a words on a page live, because we're talking about blood and flesh people who went through real situations. And looking forward to checking.
What I found really interesting about The Chosen is it has really resonated with the young adults, like generation, I think they call them the millennials, or not the millennials, but the Generation Z, I think it is. And it's really resonated with them. And that's really great, because that's a generation that we're struggling to connect with.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you a question about hope, because hope is what this Dealing Hope podcast has been about right from its inception. It's been going for over 2 years now, pretty much from March of the first lockdown, and wanting to deal hope, encourage leaders across our church. And I've been trying to frame a question when I speak to the hope dealers. And so I'm going to try this on you. This is the first time I've tried this, Andrew. But if you were to think back, and I'm taking you on a question again of, thinking back as far as you can, when do you think you came to the realization of hope, what that means and how that looks, as some kind of awareness of you were hoping for something, or realize what hope was about?
So this is mainly around the spiritual aspect of it you're talking about, mainly?
Could be anything. Just that, yeah, it could be anything. For me, hoping the weekend wouldn't go so long, would go slow, so I wouldn't have to go back to school. So quite broadly, really, yeah.
I guess because my birthday falls in December, so it's literally 4 days before Christmas. So it's a big gap between presents, So for me, my first real strong recollection is looking forward to that time,
Yes.
and just really wondering what my parents were going to give me this time around, and they usually did a pretty good job of knowing what I liked and what I wanted,
Oh, wow.
and so they were. I don't remember ever getting a gift that mum and dad hadn't put some thought into. It was always something I really liked, and so I've always appreciated that. But that being that hopeful expectation of, oh, what are they going to get me? What is it this time? So yeah, I grew up, knowing that my parents actually really loved me enough to know the kind of things that I was into and interested in. So that was probably, in that sense, my first recollection of a real solid idea of hope.
Sounds like you weren't disappointed either.
No, and that, yeah, just some really strong spiritual illustrations there. But
Yes, yeah.
absolutely, mum and dad, and it makes me think of how the Bible talks about us knowing God's will, but He knows us, and mum and dad were able to instill that kind of hopefulness in me, not just from a physical sense, but a spiritual sense as well, I think. Yeah.
Would you describe yourself as a hopeful person? How do you see yourself when it comes to hope?
My natural go-to place is, I'm a bit of a pessimist, to be honest. So I have to stay focused to be hopeful. I can easily be the glass half empty kind of guy, and so I have to be really intentional about remembering the way God has led me, how I've been blessed, so that I can look forward then with that hope, knowing that He's never forsaken me in the past. He's not going to forsake me in the future. Yeah.
I really appreciate your openness and vulnerability there, because you then made two very key points. To me, I'm hearing you say, and that's why for you, the importance of being able to focus, and secondly, to remember, so that you're not distracted, if that is a natural starting point. But it also speaks to me as a person who is glass half full and can be overly hopeful and then lose. You know, and you know me. I'm very much coming from that visionary place and can really paint this great picture that may sometimes falter on being disconnected with reality. And so I think that that place of hope and where it sits with us, and I like the way you said it, is God has been faithful. He will continue to be. Yeah.
And I guess, you know, with us working together in the past, you know, I think we've been able to balance each other out without even realizing it in those areas that, you know, I like to put those practical things to, and I love catching the vision and running with it that way. So, yeah, I have really appreciated working with you over the years, and I think we've made a good
And
team.
likewise, Andrew, likewise, because it's then with your way of looking at things, you've been able to ask the questions, you know, the hard questions that I don't think of, and put flesh to things that you and I have worked on together, and with the teams that we've worked with over the years. I just want to get this next question right. So I just wanted to get my phrasing here.
Yep.
So for you then, Andrew, when it comes to waiting for Jesus, how do you handle that? Did you say you start from that place of, you know, is Jesus going to, you know, come back and he doesn't turn up? And that might be him calling, but
Maybe. Nobody rings me ever. Yeah. Yeah, you know, the last couple of years have been, for everyone, the last couple of years have been really uncertain. You know, there's all these ups and downs with the whole COVID thing. But for me, again, it's looking back at the past. You know, one of my favorite quotes from Ellen White is that we have nothing to fear for the future, lest we forget the Lord's leading in the past. And I know I'm ad-libbing that a little bit, but the, looking back so that we can have confidence moving forward, I think is really important.
yeah.
And so again, for me, you know, I can see all through Scripture the way God has led, the way He's always kept His promises. You know, that gives me confidence. But ultimately, it's my own life and the life of my family that I can see God's leading and direction. That again, I just know He's got us. You know, and there's going to be stressful times, there's going to be hard times, but I know His plan is going to be worked out in the end. And the beauty is that we can have that assurance that we're part of that plan, and He wants us in the kingdom. So I love that, and that keeps me going. Yeah.
There's real assurance there.
Absolutely. And you know, that's not something I haven't always had that. Sorry, I haven't always had that assurance. Yeah, even growing up in the church, you know, you learn to love God, but there's an element of not knowing whether you're in the right place, you know. But praise the Lord, we discovered grace, and my wife and I discovered the whole idea of God's grace, truly God's grace, when we went to Tui Ridge, and have had a fantastic assurance of our salvation, not because of anything we've done, but because of everything Christ has done for us. So,
and thank you for saying that, Andrew. I think that's just such an important message, and for that to be heard is very encouraging to me, and I know to people who are listening. And you say about Tui Ridge, and we're going to get to that next, but so many, and some of our brothers and sisters, they are older than us, so they could be our parents, but we are struck when we listen to them, whether it's in a Sabbath school class or just at a conversation at lunch or in passing, and you're thinking, they're not sure. They're not sure. They're not confident. And they've been walking with the Lord all this time, but there's just a little, is this for real? Is this going to happen? Question. And I think This is a hope we all hold on to. It's worth holding on to. And
Mm,
for us to keep sharing with each other what you've just shared and encouraging each other is so, so important
yeah.
in a world where
Amen.
it's just.
Mm,
So let me go to Tui Ridge. You know, even today, so many people still identify Andrew and Nora West with Tui Ridge, and
yep.
those words are all synonymous and are linked eternally. um, but you coming to Tui Ridge, tell us that story, how that happened, because that's a real God journey, wasn't it?
It was. We probably don't have the time to give the full story, so we'll give the abridged version. But you know, we were down in Hawera. Nora and I had been married for a few years, and um, we were wondering what to do with our lives. And as to go right back as a young person, when I was about 16, our pastor at the time, we were sitting at a wedding at the same table, and it was Pastor Gary Webster actually who was our
Ah,
pastor, and he was just an intern at the time. And
oh,
as we were sitting at that table, he said, "Andrew, have you ever considered ministry?" So I was about 16, and I said, "Nah, nah." um, but for whatever reason, you know, he had that
just
insight.
end the conversation right there.
Yeah, yeah, that's scary. And I, you know, I dismissed it, but at the same time, that thing just didn't go away. It was always in the back of my head. Why would he say such a thing? Um,
Mm,
so we, in 1995, Nora and I decided that um, we would head to Avondale College and we'd do ministry. But at the same time, we had gone to a Pathfinder leadership weekend, and because finances were tough for us at that time, and we went to a Pathfinder leadership weekend at Tui Ridge, and the then manager made an announcement during the leadership weekend that there was a position going as a grounds person and maintenance guy at Tui Ridge.
mm.
And I didn't think anything of it, didn't really put anything together. But on our way home, both my lovely wife and a friend of ours who was in the back of the car, they started telling me that I needed to apply for that job to Tui Ridge.
Okay.
And it was a long trip home. So by the time we got home, I agreed that I'd apply. And we got shortlisted, and ended up we were offered the position to start work at Tui Ridge at the end of 1995,
Amazing.
which we did. But when I did the application, I said to the Tui Ridge board at the time, I said, we will work here for 2 years and then we'll go to Avondale. That was
Mm.
we'd get enough money, we'd save
Okay.
up and go to Avondale.
Yep.
But we never got to Avondale. And we spent 15 years at Tui Ridge. So
Right.
and we loved it. You know,
Yeah.
it was initially I wondered what the heck I'd done. I thought I'd made a mistake, but again, looking back, the way God led us there, and there's lots of things we could go into, but you know, lots
Yeah.
of ways that it showed that He had given us this opportunity.
Yeah.
And then as the years rolled by, you know, the ministry we were able to enjoy at Tui Ridge was a real blessing.
It was. It was. It
Yeah.
was an incredible time, and what you and Nora were able to do, and your children, of course, and the teams that you worked and with and built, really was significant. Just going there to Two Ridge last last week, I should say, and seeing Nola there.
Mm.
You know, I think she said 19 years.
Yeah, she's done phenomenal. Yeah.
And yes, and just to see her, just develop to be this wonderful, outgoing leader who has always
Mm.
been such a quiet in the background person, and
Yeah.
just a confidence is just one great example.
Mm.
You're right. There's so much to say about Tui Ridge and your time there, but what I want to pick on here is how did it happen? What was the journey, the tension of where you're loving what you're doing, you're in a good place, and then moving out of that or transitioning? Because there are people who may be in that situation right now. They're not sure whether they're in the right place, or they're just in the transition, or feel like they're in the wrong place right now. But what was it like for you when did you come to the realization it was time to go? How did you know where to go next? Talk about that.
Okay, so like I say, we were going to go to Avondale, but things transpired. I went from being the grounds guy to ended up being the manager of the park, and came to the conclusion that this was the ministry that God had called us to. We were loving it. We were being blessed by it. We thought we were helping others and blessing others as well. So that was it. That was always felt reciprocal, which was great.
Good.
And we got to 10 years in ministry there, and we had a conference session, and there was I remember it really well because it was a really stressful time, because there was debate about whether Tui Ridge would be sold at that session, all sorts of vicious rumors. And I had to make a presentation on behalf of Tui Ridge there. So that was a massive thing for me. But what we saw out of that session was a vote of confidence from the conference.
Let me just hold you really quickly here. For you who are listening, a session is a meeting of members. It's a members meeting across the North Island of New Zealand. All Assemblies of Adventists send representatives to this meeting, which we typically call a session.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, good.
So, to stand in front of that number of, I don't know how many, probably 300 or 400 people, and then to hear them vote to keep Tui Ridge, and not only that, but to vote to actually have future big camps, where the whole North Island comes together and worships together for a week, to have them held at Tui Ridge was, to Nora and I, a real endorsement of not just our ministry, but of what we believe Tui Ridge could actually be for our conference, for our church family. So on the way home, actually in the car, we were driving along, and it was dark, it was a late night travel back to Rotorua. And I said to Nora, you know what, I think our time at Tui Ridge is over. I think we're coming to a close. It just was a real strong impression. And she said, I feel the same way. The same way. So that was 10 years in. Nothing happened. But
Lord, what are you saying, Lord? Why are you stirring us?
Yeah, but it was just, for me, it's clearly I'm a slow learner, God has worked with us very gently and very slowly over the years.
I don't think anyone can be slower than me, Andrew, so you're okay. You're okay.
I don't know. But then I had the opportunity not long after that to go to Melbourne for a South Pacific Division meeting. And during that meeting, there was an announcement made that there was a position for a youth director in one of the conferences in Australia. And I heard it and didn't give much thought to it at all. And then after all the meetings were finished and I was sitting in the departure lounge at the airport, I thought I knew the person, but apparently I talked to that person I thought it was many years later, and they said, no, that wasn't me. So I don't know who it was now. But we were sitting in the departure lounge, and this person was just across from me, and they said, so are you going to apply for that job as a youth director in Australia? And I said, why would I do that? I'm not a pastor. I haven't done any training, no formal training. Why would I do that? And they said, you'd be perfect for the job. And I just kind of dismissed it again. But, I couldn't dismiss that on the plane. For the 3.5 hours back to New Zealand, I had this thing playing on my mind.
Wow.
And then I had another 2.5 hours drive from Auckland back to Rotorua. And so it was late when I got home, and I said to Nora, I have to tell you something. I just can't shake this thought. It's just in my brain. I can't change it. And I said, I think I have to apply for a job in Australia.
Wow.
Which I did in the end. Funnily enough, I didn't get the job. So that was cool. And I thought, oh, well, that's God answering, telling me that It was my dream, not his. But then a year later, that same conference contacted us, actually contacted you,
Oh,
and put a call through for me to go and do that job. Do you remember that?
I do, actually. I do.
Yeah.
I think
And
yeah, yeah.
I can remember you telling me that you were hesitant to bring the call forward, but you did anyway. And I had a chat with the
Uh,
president over there, and
mm,
they offered me the position, the same position I applied for a year out. And he gave me 24 hours to make a decision.
well, that was a quick turnaround.
It was. I thought that was a bit short, but anyway, we prayed. Nora and I prayed over it.
Mm,
We
mm.
included our family. That was just our daughter at the time, and I said, Lord, I need an answer in the morning. I need you to give me a solid answer in the morning.
Mm, mm.
And so when I got up in the morning, I put my feet on the floor, got out of bed, put my feet on the floor. I turned around and said to my wife, we're not going to Australia. It just, for some reason, it didn't feel right.
Wow.
So, and then it was a phone call from you, just saying that you'd like to have a chat with me. So I thought I got into trouble. And so you and Russell Jones came down to Tui Ridge. I can still remember, so we were sitting in the dining room across from each other, and you asked me the question, you've talked about this, Andrew, for a while, off and on, about going into ministry.
Mm.
Are you serious about pastoral ministry? And I don't know whether you realize, but I sat there looking at you, and in my head, I said no. In my head, I said no. But when I opened my mouth, I said yes.
Oh, God is good. God is
He
good.
is. He
God is
is.
good.
And
Um,
so, yeah, and then, the rest is history, as they say, that we
it's
made our way
interesting
into ministry.
you raise that because I had forgotten. I had forgotten about that time of the call coming through, and also the discussions we'd had, and thinking through. Because remember, we had as a board asked you to and Nora to go and have a look at a whole lot of campgrounds and
That's right.
facilities around the world, and
Mm,
you'd recently come back from that, and yet, yeah,
mm,
there was that sense, and I was really torn because we really felt there was a future of Tui Ridge with you and what you had been able to build up to that point with Nora. Now that you've been around the world and had a look at a whole lot of different places, this would be the catalyst for us going forward. And as you know, there were others who were thinking the same, and we were all
mm,
quite keen for this future. But at the same time, there's this other this other message coming through, and as you say, you're listening and praying and thinking, and it really did help us think through when that call came and see you actually think about it. It
mm.
had us thinking, okay, the Lord is saying something here. And this is something that is interesting to me. You get a call, and it doesn't mean that's the actual call.
Mm,
And I've seen that happen many times. This appears to be the call, but it's actually something that is leading to something else.
yeah.
And sometimes you get a call, and it's a call just for you to think about yourself and where you are right now, but you say no to the call because it's not the right call.
Mm,
Or you think about yourself and where you are, and you realize this is not the call, but it's actually leading me to something, to another particular call, which is what I am very sure took place in your situation, as you're reminding me now about what took place. But still, there's some discussions for you and Nora when you're thinking in your head no, and you're saying to Russell and me yes. You
mm.
pick up there and keep sharing what took place after that.
Well, I mean, clearly you guys offered me a position, but you asked when I would want to start. And we said we wanted to finish 15 years at Tui Ridge. So we wanted to wrap it up at Tui Ridge
Mm,
at 15. And we were, at that point, we were 12 years in.
mm,
And so then the conference gracefully allowed me to do some study while I was still at Tui Ridge to get me ready into ministry, and that was hugely beneficial. I'm a person who likes to learn on the job, so that worked perfectly for me, and I was able to apply what I was learning as I went along. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was great. Nora and I talked about it. Nora was not as keen to leave Tui Ridge as I was.
She loved Tui Ridge.
Yeah, and I mean,
Oh,
we did. We loved it. I
yeah.
felt as though I had come, for whatever reason, as much as we loved it, or I loved it, I felt as though I'd come to the end of what God had called me to do,
Hmm.
and it felt like He was calling me somewhere else. So I can't quantify it. It's just how I felt, you know? Yeah,
Okay, so because I was going to ask you that question, and now you've answered it for me.
yeah.
You just had that realization. Was it a physical feeling? Was it a spiritual feeling? Emotional? Just to help somebody who's thinking. So how do I know? How do I know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it was it wasn't logical in some ways,
Okay.
because we had a good life at Tui Ridge. It was
Yeah.
a fantastic place to work,
Mm.
great
Great place
place to
to
raise
live.
your family. Yeah.
Yes.
But for me, I felt that I kind of reached the end of what I could do for Tui Ridge. And, we often talk about seasons
Mm.
and
Mm.
how there's a season for everything. And,
Mm.
we'd been there for 15 years. Well, we were going to be there at 15 years. And I thought it was time for someone new, someone fresh. I couldn't I couldn't explain why. I mean, I could have stayed there till I retired, but
Yeah.
it just felt that, and it felt like God was
Mm.
it was a feeling, both emotional, every
Mm.
aspect
Okay.
of our being, saying, "This is where you need to be going next." I felt totally inadequate. I can tell you that. To step into ministry, pastoral ministry, I didn't feel as though I had anything to offer, but I couldn't shake the fact that this
Mm.
is where I felt God leading. And
And
then when
I've
you offered us the position in Tauranga, I thought, what were the conference thinking?
well, in hindsight, I can say we were brilliant.
Yes,
But what's really important about what you're saying, Andrew, is the self-awareness, the understanding of yourself, where you can say, hey, I've done everything that I can. I've reached that point. And I think that's an important point to get to. I don't know if you're willing to share how you knew that, because why I say that is because often, myself included, I think, oh, I'm just so great and I can just keep on going here. Or I'm like leaving early and yet I haven't given everything that I could possibly give. Was there a cognitive, intellectual level? Oh, hey, I've given everything here, and that's how I know as well.
yeah, I guess I had dreams for Tui Ridge. I still do, to be quite honest.
Mm,
I still have
mm,
dreams to where I would love to see Tui Ridge go. But I felt as though it wasn't me. The,
okay.
it kind of reminded me a little bit about David and Solomon, how
Mm,
David had a desperation to build the temple for
yes.
God. But God said,
Yes.
no, that's not your job. You can have the dream, you can set up the plans, but
Yes.
I'll give that honor to someone else.
Ah,
And
okay.
and I felt a little bit the same way. Not saying I'm
Mm,
anything like David or Solomon for that matter,
sure,
but
sure.
but and Nora and I had in the years that we'd been at Tui Ridge, we'd met many of the other camp managers across the South Pacific
Mm,
and got to know them really well. Many of them left their positions with negative feelings towards
mm,
their employers, and just bad blood, and it just it ended badly, and we didn't want that to happen. And so we
no.
made it very clear to ourselves if we sat down, and we talked a lot about this kind of thing, that we didn't want to outstay our usefulness at Tui Ridge to the point where people would be offended or hurt, including ourselves. And so we were very keenly aware that this wasn't forever. And so when I started to feel those very clear thoughts that, you know what, you've done as much as you can here. I wasn't as creative as I had been. I could see things, but I didn't really feel as I knew how to implement them. And it was feeling a bit too, to be honest, that sometimes the board, our Tui Ridge board, was heading in a different direction to what I wanted to go. And so I just felt there was a disconnect starting to happen, and a real strong pull towards, you know, what would it be like to be a pastor? What would it be like to work within a church setting, and a different aspect? So yeah, God had a way of just subtly and gently changing my focus without even really realizing it.
Well, let's move to the pastor question now. 15 years at Tui Ridge, including a bulk of that being the manager there. Now, how many years as a pastor?
12 nearly.
Wow.
Yeah. And you know what's funny is, like you say, when I'm at Tui Ridge for an event, people still come up to me and go, "Hey, you know, the toilet rolls are getting low." You know? That's not my problem.
Come on, mate, do your job.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so nearly 12 years in ministry now, so pastoral ministry. Yeah.
Let me ask you a very broad question, and you choose how you answer this question now, 12 years in as a pastor. It's a really funny world we live in, and when you started, and I think back 12 years, I had no idea what the world would be like in the future. I didn't realize how crazy it would be. You always hear, oh, it's going to be terrible in the future, and here we are living in the future, and it's just a mess. What gives you hope that what you are doing as a pastor is worthwhile? And actually give me something that you see or know or observe that gives you hope today when it feels like, there is no hope.
It's an interesting question, you know, because I've thought about it, and the same kind of things that inspired me at Tui Ridge still inspire me today, even in ministry. The things I loved about the ministry at Tui Ridge was watching young people grow in their faith. And we saw that through our teen camps and junior camps, or, you know, big camps later on. Even seeing my own staff develop a faith, you know, that was pretty cool to see. It's the same thing in pastoral ministry. So maybe God had a hand over it all the way. But watching young people fall in love with Jesus is just incredible. I've had the wonderful privilege of seeing people come in, just walk in off the street into our church foyer, because they've been watching Hope Channel and other media that had drawn them to God and to our humble little church in Tauranga. And, you know, to have somebody stand there in the foyer and say to you, "I think I want to be a Seventh-day Adventist," you know, that just straight off the bat, you know, that's incredible. And then to study with them and to realize that actually the Holy Spirit's done the bulk of the work here. It's just my job to integrate them into the church family, you know. And that's exciting to know that you're partnering with God is just, and seeing the evidence of that with people coming. You know, the man that came in and said that he wanted to become a Seventh-day Adventist, he'd never been a Christian all his life.
Oh, wow.
And his entire life he'd spent outside of the church, of any kind of church. But God inspired him and called him, and, you know, he's now a deacon in our church. You know, he's just, and loving God. It's just incredible. So what that does to me, as a person who's grown up in a Christian family, grown up in the Adventist church, is to see that everything that I've placed my hope in is actually real and tangible, because other people are coming in, being brought in by the drawing of the Holy Spirit. So that's really reassuring in that regard. But it is, even, you know, if anybody told me that I would have done 50 funerals since coming into ministry, which I have done 50 funerals, It's not my
Yeah.
preaching that does it, I don't think, but
Uh,
but even the privilege
yes.
of bringing hope to those families who have
Yeah.
lost a loved one. It's such a privilege and such an honor to be in a very vulnerable place with those people, and to help them see that there's something better to look forward to. So, yeah, it
I
was a
hear
broad
you
question, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I hear you talking about transformation and
Mm,
how it gives you hope. You see a life changed, and because you still see lives being changed, even in the turmoil of the world today, it just gives you hope that God is still working and God's going
mm,
to come through with what He has promised. And then, as you say, what a privilege as a pastor when a funeral takes place to then minister to a community of people who may never ever come into your church normally,
mm,
now here there because of a funeral, and you get
mm.
to give them hope in the most difficult time in their lives.
Yeah, yeah, it's an amazing privilege. We had
Mm.
one family come to us that had lost a son,
Oh,
and it was, yeah, he struggled with depression and mental illness, and they had gone to the funeral director, and the funeral director actually recommended um, our church as the church to take the funeral,
man.
and not blowing my own trumpet, he recommended me as well, because he'd said he'd been to other funerals that we had conducted,
Mm.
and that they were special, and that he said they'll do a good job, and what an honor to have that kind of
Yes.
community impact,
Yes.
especially in a vulnerable situation like that.
Mm. Mm. Absolutely. Well, Andrew, it's amazing how time has flown, and I am going to wrap this up, but I just captured there at the end something that you've said about um, your speaking into situations like funerals, and have known you as someone who speaks well. You pay attention to your preparation and to your delivery, uh, and you even adapt well to whoever you're speaking to, whether it would be a primary school student or to adults, like a 60s plus group. You do so well there. So I'm going to take us into a bit of overtime here and just ask you just some of your thinking when you're preparing your messages. What is it that you are thinking through in the way you prepare them? And then even as you're delivering them, what is some of your processes and thinking?
Oh wow! I can't just say I wing it.
No, I know you don't. I know.
um, I think it's important to know who you're talking to,
Mm,
and I don't necessarily mean you have to have on a first name basis, but know your audience. Know that it's a church of so many people, or a particular age bracket, and then ensure that what you're saying is easy to understand.
okay.
Um, what I love about Jesus is that he spoke and everyone understood. The
Mm,
children would get something from it, the adults would get it, and the intellectuals would be challenged at a different level. Now he's
yes.
divine. I'm not that,
Yeah.
but through the power of the Holy Spirit, I can have a
Mm,
similar impact. And so,
mm,
get rid of the big fancy words,
mm.
but if you need to use them, then explain what those fancy words are,
Yes.
um, in the sense that people can truly grasp the simplicity of the gospel, um, and lift Jesus up all the
Mm.
time. Jesus has to be the center of the message. If he's
Amen.
not,
Amen.
you're wasting your breath.
Yeah.
Um,
I know I'm just really jumping in with a different set of questions here, but I just wanted to grab this off you. So just in closing, so just a couple of tips on storytelling. You're a great storyteller. What's something for speakers to remember when telling stories?
put yourself in the story. You
Okay.
be the character. Try and feel the emotions that the people are going through. because that'll help you explain the story better. So put yourself in the character. Don't go overboard on details, but details are important. So, you know, paint a picture in the people's minds about what's going on around you, the key things that are important. You know, if they're on a sea, is it stormy? Is it calm? You know, are the waves crashing? Is the lightning flashing? Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, big thing, put yourself in the story. How do you feel if you're the character?
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, that's a good takeaway for us and to end up on. Andrew, thank you so much for getting hope today. And
Thank you.
I